There's a new sun rising up angry in the sky. There's a new voice crying, we're not afraid to die. Let the old world make believe that blind and deaf and dumb, but nothing can change the shape of things to come.
In my last video on this playlist, I mentioned that one thing that prevents Catholics from confidently advocating on behalf of the Church on some political issues is because that many political issues are obscure, and we won't fully understand them until after the passage of time and after we have some historical perspective. There are many reasons for this, but one is that corrupt politicians intentionally muddy the waters with legislation so that they can pander to the public while actually serving the plutocracy. As a case study on this, I'm devoting this video to the career of Monsignor John A. Ryan. He had a long career and was born in 1869 and died in 1945. Though most people probably aren't aware of him nowadays, our grandparents were probably well aware of him. His visibility could be compared to Fulton J. Sheen, whose career overlapped Ryan's for a couple decades. For example, from 1930, the year Monsignor Sheen first started up his national weekly radio show, until Ryan's death in 1945, both men were highly visible. According to the archives at newspapers.com, Sheen was mentioned in the newspapers 14,849 times, while Ryan was a fairly close second, being mentioned 12,103 times. Both Sheen and Ryan taught at the Catholic University of America, and they both served on its faculty at the same time from 1927 to 1939. The Catholic University of America is in Washington, D.C., so both Sheen and Ryan were in a location that provided easy access to newspaper reporters. However, the areas of expertise of the two priests were different. While Sheen was an inspirational orator, Ryan was a specialist on political affairs. Whenever a newspaper wanted a quote giving a Catholic perspective on a political issue, more often than not, they'd go to Ryan. Nowadays, we'd probably consider Monsignor Ryan a liberal Catholic, but we need to keep in mind that before the division brought on by the Second Vatican Council, for the most part, the laity saw Catholic teaching as a single, consistent thing. It didn't seem to the laity that there was liberal Catholicism or conservative Catholicism. It was all pretty much just Catholicism. The reason that I'm discussing Monsignor Ryan in this video is that with historical perspective, we can now see that he was wrong on a lot of things, seemingly almost everything. But it wasn't really so apparent during his own lifetime. In 1921, Monsignor Ryan published A Catechism of the Social Question. Because it was written in the style of a catechism, it probably seemed to be authoritative. Though someday I might do a deeper dive on Monsignor Ryan, today I'm just going to go through his catechism to highlight some things that jumped out at me. For instance, question, does a man need to belong to a labor union? Answer, as a rule, he cannot by himself improve his working conditions, lessen the advantage in bargaining which the employer holds, or give dignity to his work in the sight of other people in the community. Through the union, he can influence three of these facts. So Monsignor Ryan is pretty much saying that a man must join a union. With historical perspective, we can now see that this is an oversimplification and actually a distortion of the true Catholic position, though it really wasn't as obvious during Ryan's time. Pope Leo XIII clearly stated that unions can be a very good thing for workers. He said, "The most important of all are working men's unions. It is gratifying to know that there are actually in existence not a few associations of this nature, consisting either of workmen alone or of workmen and employers together, but it were greatly to be desired that they should become more numerous and more efficient." The Catholic perspective encourages cooperation between labor and management. Also, Pope Leo added this, "There is a good deal of evidence in favor of the opinion that many of these societies are in the hands of secret leaders and are managed on principles ill according with Christianity and the public well-being, and that they do their utmost to get within their grasp the whole field of labor, and force the working men to either join them or to starve. Under these circumstances, Christian working men must do one of two things, either join the association in which their religion will be exposed to peril, or form associations among themselves and unite their forces so as to shake off courageously the yoke of so unrighteous and intolerable an oppression. No one who does not wish to expose man's chief good to extreme risk will for a moment hesitate to say that the second alternative should by all means be adopted. So Pope Leo correctly foresaw that unions would become susceptible to communist infiltration. Many Catholic workers who relied on Msgr. Ryan's advice became members of unions affiliated with the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Workers. Until it merged with the AFL in 1955, the leadership of the CIO and many of its locals were dominated by communists. People who relied on Msgr. Ryan's advice did not consider Pope Leo's recommendation that rather than joining communist-dominated unions, workers should form associations among themselves and unite to shake off the yoke of unrighteous and intolerable oppression. However, this did not seem so apparent until after World War II. Historical perspective was needed to see this more clearly. Msgr. Ryan also wrote, "Is the lack of ownership by the laborer a serious evil? Answer, yes, because the final control of the conditions of work and livelihood is in the hands of those who own the means of livelihood. Lacking ownership, the workers lack a normal amount of personal independence. Lack of ownership also causes a lack of interest and personal responsibility." I'm really not sure where Ryan got this from. Perhaps he's saying that it's not desirable for a worker who is paid an hourly wage to be alienated from his labor. But this Q&A can be seen as opposing private ownership of industry. It could also be read that Msgr. Ryan is advocating communism. However, St. Thomas Aquinas wrote, "It is lawful for a man to hold private property, and it is also necessary for the carrying on of human existence." Msgr. Ryan asks, "What rates of interest are just?" His answer seems to say that some usury is just. Please see my playlist on usury. I find this one extremely interesting. Is every legislative proposal called socialistic condemned by the church? His answer is, to call a proposal socialistic does not make it socialism. Socialism is common ownership and management of substantially all the means of production. So, to Msgr. Ryan, and probably to many other Catholics of his time, it's not socialism unless it involves the complete ownership of all means of production. Nowadays, with hindsight, we recognize the evil of creeping socialism. But that really didn't become an issue until after World War II. And we can see this by looking through the archives at newspaper.com. The first mention of the term creeping socialism that I could find on the website newspapers.com was in October of 1926, and it appeared in a handful of newspapers. Then the term didn't appear again until it was used once in 1930, and then again once in 1931. And then it didn't appear again until 8 years later in 1939. So, again, it is only with the benefit of hindsight that we're able to see the danger of creeping socialism more clearly. But before I conclude this video, let's discuss a few other interesting things about Msgr. Ryan. For instance, Ryan was a member of the American Eugenics Society, but he resigned in 1931 because the organization favored sterilization, birth control, and divorce. According to an article by Rachel Gur-Ari, the American Eugenics Society was established in 1926 to promote the study of improving the genetic composition of humans through controlled reproduction of different races and classes of people. With hindsight, we can see that this was a horrible organization. Another suspect organization to which Ryan joined was the Committee of Catholics for Human Rights. In fact, he was a founding member. As you may recall from my Communist Infiltration of the Catholic Church playlist, this organization was later identified in congressional hearings as a Communist Front organization. Please note that though this organization was run by communists, it recruited high-profile members who were not communists because those members gave the organization seeming legitimacy. I should also add that I don't think that Ryan was a communist infiltrator. Please keep in mind that he wrote his catechism way back in 1921. So he pretty much always held his leftist beliefs, and so he is a willing dupe for organizations that later came along, such as the Committee of Catholics for Human Rights. So did anyone ever call out Ryan for going off the rails? Father Charles Coughlin did after Ryan gave a national radio endorsement for President Franklin D. Roosevelt's campaign for re-election in 1936, while at the same time Ryan criticized Father Coughlin for his criticisms of Roosevelt. Father Coughlin responded by calling Ryan the Right Reverend New Dealer. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.
There's a new sun rising up angry in the sky. There's a new voice crying, we're not afraid to die. Let the old